Now George is going to talk about the settlement houses that were in Detroit in those days, in the 20s and 30s.
Well, there are some houses all throughout Detroit, and I belong to the Franklin Settlement. It was one settlement house, and a boys' club was one on the west side. Jewish Center had different, so each area had a club, whether it's a settlement or a boys' club or a Jewish club. Delray, the Hungarians, and of course my settlement was Romanians and Italians and Syrians and blacks. So we were small groups of all these different nationalities and colors. And so yeah, you develop your little cliques, and they're like little gangs too. Of course, as people got more civilized, you weren't confronted if you were in someone else's neighborhood, and like more. But in the early days, there was a sense, like a sense of protected by being a gang in your neighborhood, and then things kind of leveled off. People got more civilized and more civilized. Well, then you could didn't have to be confronted all the time with each group or colors that you would meet.
And what were all the activities that took place in these settlement houses?
Well, at the summerhouse, right after school in the fall, you'd run down and they had a gym. You could play basketball or volleyball. You had clubhouse rooms where you had different clubs, girls' club, boys' club, and they each had different activities. You had so many interests that were there, and each interest had an activity and had a room where they could do what the activities that they were involved in. So there was a kind of a community hall where each group could have each age group would click together, and so by ages and sexes, and so you learned to get organized. You had so as a result, you developed a lot of little clubs, boys' clubs, and have maybe 5 or 6 Italians in one club, Italian Romanians in another one, and Syrians and so forth. And then as a result, you had these clubs, then suddenly you developed teams, and you'd play sports, basketball in the fall, baseball in the summer. So the summer was a melting pot where each group would get together and form a group that could work as a unit, as a team. So you learn these organizations.
And what all services were provided in the settlement houses?
Well, after school, that's before public libraries all over the city. They had a library. You could go to the library there. You could go to the gym and play games. So there's little activities that were involved all around, boys and girls in little groups, and that they could do on their own. And then when your groups got together, you suddenly formed teams, and each team had age limits. In other words, they had a senior group, junior group, and a midget group, all based on their ages, and those groups were created.
And there were services there as well, such as a nurse and
The nurse. Well, you were in the settlement house, and you had the facilities on medical treatments. On every Wednesday, they'd have a doctor be there, and people would come in with their aches and pains and all services of the settlement. Of course, then you had the library, and you had all the different activities at the gym, all at the settlement.
And you were active with that even through your college years and even beyond that.
Well, I was always interested. Of course, when I went to college, I moved out of the neighborhood, but I was always going to come back to that settlement for some of the weekend functions or whatever activity I was always involved in. But there was something going on at all times, at all ages, and all groups. So it didn't get boring. And during the school year, after school classes, you'd run down to the settlement, get with your groups, And your activities from after school from 3 to 6, and to some of the various activities that you're involved in, basketball or volleyball or something.
Okay, thank you, George.